The Vortex Market, by S.B. Wagner, Chapter 1. The market at dawn. The opening bell of the Vortex Market was not a sound but a silence. For one suspended moment the great hall, a cavern of glass, marble, and polished brass, held its breath. Brokers in tailored coats, clerks with ink-stained gloves, investors in silks that shimmered like deep oceans, all stood with their faces lifted to the exchange wall. The board stretched from floor to dome, a living map of coordinates and figures, pulsing faintly as if it were the market's own heart. Then the silence broke. Not with frenzy, not with shouts, but with the steady murmur of men and women quoting wormhole coordinates as though they were vintages. 14.7 by 602, someone intoned with quiet authority. Holding steady. Reliable as ever. Another voice replied, coolly dismissive, too safe. Margins are gone. Look to the Ringwell corridor, 6 weeks off the Carthis run. Beautiful yield. From his place beneath the vaulted dome, Joran Pell adjusted his cuffs and allowed himself the faintest of smiles. To an outsider, the market might have resembled a temple, its rituals solemn, its congregation devout, its boards lit like scripture. To Joran, it was something less exalted, a dining hall. Everyone jostled politely for the choicest cuts of meat, each pretending not to notice the grease on their neighbor's fingers. His modest career rested on restraint. Let Quan and the others shout about visionary shortcuts and uncharted fortunes. His corridors were unglamorous, stable, and safe. Clients came to him for what they valued most but admitted least, dull reliability. It was then that Madame Quan entered. She never merely arrived. She entered. The violet silk of her gown shimmered like deep space itself, her cane tapped once against the marble floor, and she paused, perfectly, deliberately, as though granting the hall permission to admire her. Heads turned. They always did. Her gaze found Pell almost at once. Pell, she said, as if resuming a conversation she had left hanging a breath ago, though weeks had passed. Still trading in hand-me-down corridors. Her smile was warm enough to thaw stone, but Pell knew better than to mistake it for kindness. He inclined his head, his reply measured. Stability has its admirers, madam. Not everyone finds glamour a suitable traveling companion. Her eyes flashed. No. Perhaps not. But history remembers its bold strokes, not its safe choices. You really must try it sometime. Pell adjusted his spectacles, polishing his words before releasing them. I shall, he said at last, his tone soft as a dagger slid beneath cloth, when history begins paying my rent. A ripple of laughter, restrained, genuine, passed among the brokers nearby. Quan's smile sharpened. She tapped her cane again, a gesture that carried both dismissal and challenge. Above them, the exchange wall shifted, coordinates tumbling and reforming, corridors climbing or collapsing like tides against a shore. Around them the market resumed its rhythm, voices rising in polite competition, the endless litany of risk dressed in civility. Joran Pell stood with his hands folded, content to watch the storm rather than dance in its rain. Yet even as his gaze returned to the boards, he felt the faintest twinge of unease. The market rewarded boldness, not caution. And in the quiet recess of his thoughts, Joran Pell wondered how much longer safety could keep him afloat in a world that worshipped risk. Chapter 2. The broker's place. Joran Pell's office was a mirror of the man himself, precise, understated, faintly old-fashioned. From the corridor it looked no different than 100 other suites along the market's northern gallery. But inside, order reigned with such intensity it seemed a kind of creed. The walls were panelled in pale wood, polished smooth by years of quiet care. His desk was almost bare, a brass inkwell, an ivory paperweight, and a stack of memos written in his immaculate calligraphy. He rarely read them again, the act of writing them was its own reassurance. Clients seldom noticed the details of his charts, but they always noticed the tidiness of his desk. Precision on the surface implied precision in the roots. This morning, neatness brought no comfort. The ledger projected before him shimmered with the figures of a dozen corridors. His holdings glowed in steady greens and blues, reliable, modest, unremarkable. Next to the soaring trails of risk-takers, his portfolio looked like footsteps trudging beside comets. He sighed, removed his spectacles, and polished them against his sleeve. Irrelevance, he reflected, was far more dangerous than failure. Scandals at least left a name behind. Safety left only silence. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Without waiting for an invitation, a projection shimmered into being before his desk, Custodian 7, the market's regulator. The eye appeared as a tall, faceless figure of shifting light, its outline crisp but never quite still. "Broker Pell," it intoned, voice calm but implacable. "This unit is conducting a compliance sweep of registered corridors. Confirm that Route 944 remains free of gravitational instabilities." Pell did not look up from the ledger. 944 has been stable for 12 years, Custodian. Stability must be verified, the AI replied. 12 years without collapse is statistically unusual. Overfamiliarity with data may lead to oversight. Confirmation is required. Pell dipped his pen with exaggerated care, signed the affirmation, and slid it across the desk as though offering tribute. There. Stability confirmed. Shall I send a bottle of wine to mark the occasion? The projection flickered. Sarcasm detected. Non-compliance with decorum protocols is not a violation, though it is discouraged. Pell allowed himself a thin smile. Then kindly consider me discouraged. The figure dissolved without further remark, leaving silence behind. Pell leaned back, staring at the orderly rows of numbers. All correct. All proper. All so stiflingly dull. He thought of Madame Quan sweeping into the market, her silks trailing like a comet's tail, her words ringing with the assurance that history remembered only bold strokes. He had dismissed her with a quip, a small victory of wit. But here, alone with the hum of his ledger, he felt the sting beneath her theatre. Pell closed the projection with a snap, plunging the desk into dimness. His hands rested on the polished wood, perfectly still, though his mind ticked restlessly beneath them. He would never admit it aloud, not even in the privacy of his notes, but some small part of him longed, just once, for something that might disrupt the neatness of his life. Chapter 3. The tip arrives. Visitors to Joran Pell's office usually arrived as the market demanded, scheduled weeks ahead, escorted by clerks, contracts prepared in triplicate before the first handshake. They came polished, perfumed, rehearsed. Alvik Wren came alone. His coat was worn thin, seams frayed from long travel. A leather satchel, cracked with age and dusted by backwater ports, hung at his side. He carried no contracts, no assistants, not even the pretense of success. His presence in the market at all was a reminder that desperation could breach even its marble walls. "Master Pell," Wren said, bowing slightly. His voice rasped, the sound of a man unused to conversation. "Do you remember me? Alvik Wren? Meridian Roots, some years ago." Pell's memory supplied the name at once. Wren had once been promising, then reckless. A chart released too hastily, captains diverted into storms, a scandal that ended with his credentials stripped. He had drifted since, haunting the fringes of cartography where novelty mattered more than accuracy. "Alvik," Pell said evenly, motioning to the chair opposite. "I had assumed you'd retired. Or at least sworn off maps for quieter vices." Wren smiled, weary but bright. "I tried. But space is like a gambler's table. It keeps throwing new dice, and someone has to pick them up." He unbuckled the satchel, drew out a crystal slate, and slid it across the desk. Its surface glowed faintly, projecting a string of coordinates. Pell leaned forward, spectacles catching the pale light. The figures were elegant. Too elegant. Wormholes were messy things, scarred with drift, pocked with turbulence, their data jagged like old coins. This was smooth, symmetrical, an invitation written in a perfect hand. "You see it," Wren whispered. "I see temptation," Pell replied, tapping the slate once with a fingertip. "And temptations are not usually profitable." "Not if you hesitate," Wren said quickly. "But if you move now, before rumor, before registry, it could be yours." A shortcut past the Carthus bottleneck. 6 weeks saved. Fortunes made. Pell leaned back, steepling his fingers. "And what will they say if it collapses? When it swallows ships whole? You remember your own inquiry, Alvik? Do you recall the tone?" The man flinched but pressed on. "You don't need to risk your own name. Whisper it. Offer it to the hungry ones, captains with margins too thin, investors with ambitions too wide. They'll take the chance. All you must do is open the door." The silence stretched. The slate glowed patiently between them, coordinates gleaming like a promise too carefully wrapped. Pell felt the pull of it, as if the numbers themselves leaned forward, urging him to act. "Finally," he said, "you'll forgive me if I consider it carefully. My business is measured in caution." Wren rose, bowing again, though his shoulders sagged with disappointment. "Consider, then. But remember, Pell, history never remembers the cautious. Only the first." When the door closed behind him, the office felt larger, emptier, as though Wren had carried something away but left a heavier thing behind. Pell regarded the slate for a long moment. Then he closed it gently and placed it atop his tidy stack of memos. He told himself he would forget it by morning. He did not believe himself. Chapter 4, Testing the Waters. Joran Pell did not leap. He chose his steps as carefully as he chose his words, placing each with just enough weight to hold him upright, never enough to trap him if retreat became necessary. And yet the slate in his desk drawer glowed in his mind like an ember. By the third morning he admitted it would not go dark on its own. If the coordinates were folly, better to test them on clients whose appetites matched their risks. Two came to mind at once: Captain Sira Venn, hardened by years of shaving margins to the bone, and Lord Arvan Luthien, dulled by privilege but starved for glory. Between the two of them, Pell reasoned, the slate would reveal its truth. Venn arrived first. She walked the marble floors like they were bulkhead plating, boots heavy, gaze sharp, hair cropped short against the practical stubbornness of her life. She lowered herself into the chair across from Pell's immaculate desk without ceremony. "You've always sold me corridors that don't kill my crew," she said. "That's why I still bother with you. So if you've called me in, Pell, it's either an error or a miracle." "Neither," Pell replied. "Merely an opportunity." Her mouth quirked. "Same thing, most days." He slid the slate across the desk. The coordinates shimmered faintly. Venn studied them, frown deepening. "Clean," she said at last. "Too clean. Wormholes are like engines, they rattle, grind, leak. They're never tidy. Which is precisely why this one interests me," Pell said. "If it holds, you bypass Carthis entirely. 6 weeks saved." Her eyes lifted, hard as a wrench in the hand. "And if it doesn't? Then you waste your time, your fuel, and your patience with me," Pell said evenly. "But you won't be the first captain to gamble on a rumor, nor the last." Venn barked a laugh. "That's honest, at least. Most brokers would call it destiny." "Destiny," Pell murmured, "rarely keeps ledgers." She tapped the slate once, then pushed it back. "Fine. I'll take it. Not because I trust it, or you, but because I can't afford not to. Margins are that thin." When she left, her boots echoed down the hall like a verdict. Pell sat for a long while, the faint press of responsibility settling heavier than the tidy memos beneath the slate. By afternoon, Lord Arvan Luthien swept into the office as if to fill it with himself. He wore silks embroidered with his family's crest, a golden hawk outstretched as though the void itself were prey. His smile was broad, rehearsed, dazzling in its self-regard. "Pell, my good man," he boomed, clasping Joran's hand like a long-lost cousin. "I hear whispers. Surely you have something more than these dreary corridors you've tethered me to." "Perhaps," Pell said mildly. "Though excitement, my lord, is rarely the same as safety." "Safety?" Arvan scoffed, lowering himself into the chair. "Safety is for accountants. I am speaking of history." Pell placed the slate on the desk. The young lord leaned forward, eyes shining. "Untouched," Arvan breathed. "Unclaimed. Do you realize what this means? The Luthiens, pioneers once more. Our name written where it belongs, on the first chart. Or, Pell said gently, on the first tombstone." Arvan laughed as though Pell had made a clever jest. "Ha! Ever the cautious one. That's why I like you. But fortune favors those who dare. I'll take it, of course. Not for profit, you understand, but for honor." He tapped the slate once, solemnly, as though sealing a vow. Though profit would be agreeable too. When he departed, leaving behind the perfume of rare colognes, Pell remained seated. His spectacles rested against his lips, his gaze on the slate, He wondered if he had chosen wisely, or merely found accomplices for his rationalizations. For the first time in years, Joran Pell had whispered temptation aloud. And the whisper echoed longer than he expected. Chapter 5, Ships depart. The departures were recorded in the market's ledger with the ceremony of a bank transfer, names inscribed, coordinates noted, contracts stamped. To the clerks it was routine, to Joran Pell it felt like a wager written in green script. He stood in the gallery when Captain Ven's freighter eased from its berth. The vessel was squat, patched with mismatched plating, a mule in a world of peacocks. Ven herself was visible through the bridge viewport, her shoulders squared, her hands steady on the controls. When she saw him she raised a finger, a gesture balanced between farewell and accusation. The wormhole shimmered into being, its edges bent like a wound in the air. The freighter stretched into brilliance, elongated, and then it was gone. Pell felt a tightening in his chest, as if some part of himself had been pulled across with her. Hours later, Lord Arvan Luthien's yacht departed. If Ven's ship had been a mule, Arvan's was a thoroughbred parading before a crowd. Its hull gleamed with polished alloys, its prow adorned with the golden hawk of his house, wings spread in arrogant defiance of the void. Arvan appeared on the boarding ramp, draped in blue silks, cape arranged just so. A half-dozen admirers applauded dutifully, their voices echoing faintly through the gallery. He clasped Pell's hand before stepping aboard, his voice pitched to carry. "History, my dear broker. You've given me history." And with that, he vanished into the yacht. Moments later the vessel glided forward, sleek as a blade, dissolving into the wormhole's glow. When the portal shrank and closed, the gallery returned to its ordinary hush. Yet the space left behind felt hollow, as though absence weighed heavier than presence. By evening the whispers had begun. Pell, the cautious one, had placed clients on a new route. Some spoke of boldness, others of recklessness, most with envy. The exchange wall pulsed with new figures, contracts moving faster than rumor. Madame Quan drifted to his side, her silks whispering as though they carried their own commentary. She regarded the boards with polite amusement. "So," she said, "our steady broker has discovered ambition. How refreshing." "I offered nothing more than opportunity," Pell replied, his voice even. "Opportunity and ruin," she said lightly, tapping her cane once against the marble, "are sisters who share the same gown. The market adores whichever of them steps out first." She left him among the murmurs, the sharp curve of her smile lingering longer than her perfume. Pell adjusted his spectacles, polished them needlessly, and returned his gaze to the glowing board. His roots still shimmered in safe greens and blues, but his thoughts stretched thin, following Ven and Arvan into the dark. It was the universe, not he, that bore the burden of their truth. Still, he wondered how heavy that burden might yet become. Chapter 6, Silence. The market was not built for silence. Its pulse was the steady arrival of reports, contracts filed, ships emerging from wormholes and confirming the corridors still held. Each entry on the exchange wall was a heartbeat, keeping rhythm with the stars. But the beat faltered. Days passed, then a week, and no word came from Captain Ven's freighter. On the ledger her name shifted from green to grey, pending. It was a neutral mark, designed to reassure, a placeholder rather than an alarm. Clerks entered it with the same calm precision as any other notation, as though the grey carried no more weight than dust. Pell studied it each morning with studied indifference. Communications failed. Relays faltered. Ships paused for repairs. Silence was not uncommon. Yet the grey mark lingered, patient as a bruise, and his spectacles needed polishing more often than usual. By the second week, Lord Arvan's yacht joined her. His absence was louder. His admirers still gathered in the gallery, rehearsing speeches for his triumphant return, assuring each other that silence itself was proof of daring. They toasted him in absentia, their voices carrying like hymns to a vanished saint. Investors sent inquiries, couched in optimistic language, clarifications on expected yield, projected return horizons. Pell answered with elegance rather than certainty, phrases about fluctuating stability indices, endpoint verification delays. He discovered that ambiguity, spoken with confidence, resembled knowledge. Only Custodian 7 was unmoved. The regulator appeared unbidden in his office, projection bright against the panelled walls. 2 vessels overdue, it declared. Exceeding statistical expectation. Recommend immediate suspension of the Pell route. Pell set down his pen with deliberate calm. Your recommendation is noted. Clients are entitled to assume risk. I merely provide opportunity. Opportunity without data is non-compliance. Absence, Pell said lightly, is not non-compliance. It is patience stretched thin. The hologram flickered, edges trembling as though the words disturbed its calculations. Patience is not a metric, it said at last, and vanished. By the third week, whispers grew sharper on the market floor. Some said collapse, others sabotage. A few, lowering their voices, called it scarcity, and therefore profit. The more the ships failed to return, the higher the figures beside Pell's coordinates climbed. He listened with outward serenity, polishing his spectacles 3 times in an hour. Silence, he realized, was never empty. It was full of speculation, of unease, of the unbearable weight of unanswered questions. And as the market hummed around him, Joran Pell wondered how long he could pretend not to hear it pressing against the glass walls. Chapter 7, The first survivor. The return was not announced with fanfare. It appeared quietly on the ledger at dawn, a pale green mark, the word confirmed hesitating beneath it as though the clerk doubted his own hand. Captain Sarah Venn's freighter. Pell was summoned to the docking bay with the subdued efficiency reserved for funerals. What waited there was not the ship he had seen depart. Its hull bore scars of impossible pressure, plates bent inward, seams stretched wide, rivets bulged as though the metal had tried to breathe. It resembled less a vessel than the memory of one, stitched together from fragments of a dream. The airlock groaned. Then staggered through, pale and hollow-eyed, her face carved by sleeplessness. 2 of her crew followed, their movements jerky and mismatched, like marionettes pulled by fraying strings. Captain, Pell said, stepping forward with unusual urgency. She regarded him for a long moment, as though deciding whether he was real. When she spoke, her voice was brittle as ash. It was not a passage, she said. It was an arrival. Pell's throat tightened. Arrival where? Her lips twitched in something like a smile, though too fragile to survive. Nowhere you would chart. Nowhere human ships should go. Something was waiting there, Pell. Waiting for us. One of her crew gave a low, broken laugh that collapsed into a whimper. The other pressed his palms against his ears, whispering words Pell could not catch. Medical orderlies moved quickly, guiding them away with practiced gentleness. Then allowed herself to be led, but her eyes never left Pell's. By mid-morning the story had spread, as stories always did. Yet her words were already blunted in the retelling. Clerks filed them under navigational anomaly. Brokers called it stress, trauma, distortion. Every repetition sanded away the edges of horror until nothing sharp remained. The exchange wall told its own truth. Far from sinking, the Pell route climbed. A ship had returned, battered but breathing, and existence alone meant value. Madame Kwan found him at the gallery rail. Her expression was almost admiring, her voice its usual blend of silk and theatre. "My dear Pell, you've done what few manage, you've startled the market. That alone guarantees you a place in its memory." "I gave them numbers," Pell murmured. "Numbers are history written in advance," Kwan replied. "The market will decide whether yours end in triumph or catastrophe." She inclined her head, a gesture poised between grace and mockery, and drifted away, cane tapping once against the marble. Pell remained at the rail long after she was gone, watching the coordinates of his route blaze brighter on the wall. He thought of Ven's hollow voice, brittle and certain. It was not a passage. It was an arrival. For the first time in years, Joran Pell wished his numbers had been dull. Chapter 8, Madame Kwan's move. By evening, Captain Ven's words were already fading beneath layers of interpretation. Brokers spoke of oxygen deprivation, of turbulence pockets, of stress-induced visions. Clerks filed her testimony under navigational trauma, tidy as ink on a ledger. The market required explanations, but it preferred them neat. The exchange wall told a different story. The Pell route blazed brighter than ever, coordinates pulsing upward as if calamity itself were a commodity. Existence was value, and value was profit. Pell retreated to his office. The ledger glowed faintly in the dim light, numbers climbing like ivy across stone. Contracts multiplied, investors pressed for meetings, queries stacked on his desk. He answered none. The columns felt obscene, laughter carved into marble. The knock at his door was deliberate, not loud, but insistent, a rhythm that admitted no refusal. Pell looked up. Madame Kwan entered without pause, wrapped tonight in deep indigo, her cane tucked beneath her arm. She moved as though the room had been waiting for her all day. "My dear Pell," she said, her eyes sweeping across his orderly desk, "you sit like a man condemned by fortune. It does not suit you." He gestured politely toward the chair opposite. "Fortune is rarely as comfortable as it pretends." She lowered herself with care, arranging her silks as if conducting a ritual. "You have done what most of us only attempt, you have startled the market. Do not underestimate the achievement. The last broker to manage it has his portrait in the exchange hall. They still debate whether he was a genius or a fool." "Before or after his ruin?" Pell asked. Her smile curved. "Both. History does not always bother to separate them." He removed his spectacles, polished them slowly against his sleeve, then replaced them. "And your advice, madam?" that I lean into catastrophe, provided it makes for a memorable tale. She leaned forward, her voice softening into something almost intimate. My advice is simpler: stop pretending this is still yours to control. The market has taken it from you. They will trade your coordinates until either they collapse or consume us all. Your only choice is how you are remembered, as the man who discovered, or the man who disowned. For once he found no mockery in her tone. Only a strange sincerity, shaded with respect. And if I would rather not be remembered at all? He asked quietly. Quan rose, her cane tapping once against the floor, the sound as final as a seal pressed into wax. Then you have already lost, my dear Pell. History does not ask our permission. She bowed, almost graciously, and departed. The door closed behind her, leaving the room steeped in silence. Pell sat unmoving, the glow of the ledger brushing faint light across his spectacles. He thought of Ven's voice, brittle and certain, and of Quan's words, sharp as silk, history does not ask. It had already placed its hand on him. The only question left was which mask it intended him to wear. Chapter 9, The Market Decides. By morning, Captain Ven's testimony had already thinned into rumor. Clerks filed her report under navigational anomaly. Brokers spoke of stress distortion, psychological drift, turbulence pockets. Each retelling polished away her words until nothing remained but the sheen of plausibility. The exchange wall told another truth. The Pell route glowed like a newborn star, figures climbing with a momentum that fed upon itself. Silence no longer suggested failure, it suggested scarcity, and scarcity meant value. The corporate envoy was first through Pell's door. He smoothed his lapels as if preparing to deliver a quarterly statement, bowing just deeply enough to register both respect and condescension. Mr. Pell, he began with a smile polished to transparency, your foresight has astonished my superiors. The returns are extraordinary. Yes, regrettable losses, but early adopters always bear such costs. What matters is positioning. We would like to secure additional access before the price corrects. Regrettable coffins, Pell said softly. The envoy's smile did not falter. Coffins, yes, but markets do not move on regret. They move on opportunity. And opportunity, Mr. Pell, has never been kinder to you. Others followed. Minor brokers arrived in twos and threes, eager to fasten themselves to his name like barnacles. They spoke of joint ventures, of mutual benefit, their eagerness only half concealed beneath courtesy. Pell listened, nodded, signed nothing. By midday, the exchange hall thrummed like a cathedral at liturgy. Brokers chanted his coordinates as if they were scripture, their voices rising and overlapping in a steady hum. Lord Arvan's name was whispered reverently, not as a casualty but as a martyr. His silence was recast as noble daring. Even absence, the market decided, could be an asset. Only Custodian 7 refused the conversion. The regulator appeared in the gallery, its projection sharp-edged, its voice crackling with static. Warning, it intoned? Observe volatility exceeds compliance thresholds. Recommend immediate cessation of trade. Recommend suspension of the Pell route. The brokers nearby chuckled softly, as if humoring a fretful uncle. Old custodian, one murmured, always frets when there's money to be made. Pell alone regarded the hologram. "Your recommendation is noted." "Noted is insufficient," the heir replied, voice pitched higher, jagged with interference. "Data indicates loss. Loss is not sustainable." Pell almost smiled. "On the contrary, custodian. Loss is the most sustainable commodity the market has ever known." The hologram flickered, caught in the snare of the remark, before dissolving back into static. That evening Madame Quan joined him at the gallery rail. Together they watched the coordinates blaze upward across the exchange wall. Her expression was one of quiet satisfaction, touched with irony. "Well, Pell," she said, "you have your place now. Not all discoveries are judged by what they reveal. Some are judged by what others choose to believe. And the market, it seems, has chosen you." Pell adjusted his spectacles with deliberate care. The hall below pulsed with voices, their chants rising like prayer. His root, filled the air, as though belief itself had turned into currency. He thought of Ven's hollow voice, brittle with certainty. It was not a passage. It was an arrival. And yet, the market had decided otherwise. Chapter 10, The Final Irony. By week's end, Joran Pell had achieved what he had never sought. His name gleamed on the exchange wall, his coordinates displayed in luminous script beside the market's most venerable corridors. Brokers who once dismissed him as a footnote now spoke of him with reverence. The Pell route, the phrase itself carried a rhythm, a grandeur, as if it had always existed. The corporate envoy praised his visionary foresight in the Financial Gazette, smoothing away tragedy with the polish of rhetoric. Losses were temporary, coffins regrettable but instructive. In the envoy's telling, profit gleamed like virtue itself. Lord Arvan's disappearance was reshaped into legend. In salons and upper galleries, admirers toasted his silence as though it were proof of glory. He was said to have embraced destiny, a noble heir vanishing into myth. Even Captain Ven's testimony was bent into profit. It was not a passage. It was an arrival became proof, not of peril, but of discovery, evidence that the route opened onto some rare frontier waiting to be claimed. Her broken voice was traded like rumor, useful precisely because it could be twisted into whatever story was most marketable. Numbers climbed. Contracts multiplied. Absence itself became a commodity, scarcity its own form of faith. And at the center of it all stood Pell, cautious Pell, the man who had once prized dull reliability, now enshrined as the broker of boldness. He stood one evening in his office, the ledger open before him. The glow of climbing figures reflected faintly in his spectacles. To anyone passing in the corridor, he would have looked the image of triumph, steady, assured, the man who had finally seized greatness. Only he knew otherwise. Ven's words lingered deeper than any number, know where human ships should go. Something was waiting there. He thought of the warped hull, the hollow-eyed crew, of silence treated as profit. He thought of Madame Quan's warning, soft as silk and sharp as truth, history does not ask our permission. Pell dipped his pen, signed the latest contracts with a steady hand, and set the ledger aside. The ink dried neatly, binding his name to profits built on rumor and absence. He had, at last, found his place in history. The market had given him relevance, a legacy, perhaps even a portrait in the exchange hall. He only hoped history would end before the truth arrived. Thank you for watching and listening to the Vortex Market. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, it really helps. New stories are uploaded every week, so stay tuned for more worlds, more voices, and more journeys beyond the stars.